and welcome to another Type 1 Radio Lounge. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. I'm really excited about it. We have an array of guests who will all be chipping in and making this a really great show. Very special guest joining us this evening, Dr. Judy Wood. Good evening, Dr. Wood.
Hello, good evening.
We also have with us an old friend of the show. Not that Dr. Wood isn't an old friend of the show, but Andrew, you joined us a few weeks ago. We have Andrew Johnson.
Good evening, everyone.
We have a new friend to the show joining us, Mr. Hesher from ACR's Boiler Room.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, you guys. It's great to be here.
Really great to have you on board. Lovely to talk to you this evening. And we have Miles joining us.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for coming on, everyone.
And, of course, Nick's here with myself, Fi, and Steve in the background, who's on cocktail watch, as usual.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Thank you all for joining us. So something that's been really big in the news today, the date today is the 9th of September 2017, and there has been a lot of activity as far as hurricanes go over in America, and at least they've been making a very, very big fuss about it. The whole world knows what's going on there at the moment. So I'm just going to play a couple of clips here that kind of emphasize what's been happening, and I'm just going to relate that back to events that were happening on the 10th of September, just before the events of, or what are now become the events of 9/11. So I'm just going to play a couple of clips here, starting with this one.
This is an ABC News special report. Hurricane Harvey, state of emergency.
We're not saying it's going to make landfall as a Category 5 or with those winds, but that shows you just how intense that is. And you can look at the radar here. I mean, the satellite shows just an incredibly well-defined eye. The eye has a 25-mile radius, so it's a big eye. It may get a little weaker before it gets a little bit stronger as it goes through eye wall replacement cycles, but it's a very healthy storm. There's no shear to tear it apart. There's incredibly warm water. So what you're looking at is just all the ingredients to keep a strong hurricane moving towards land.
So you said, you're not saying that it'll make it to Miami as a hurricane. It's got to go over some of the Caribbean islands, maybe Cuba. Is there a possibility it may soften a little?
There is a possibility it might soften a little. So right now, the track from the National Hurricane Center takes it past the Dominican Republic, past Puerto Rico as a Category 5. Then it weakens a little bit to a Category 4 as it moves its way towards Cuba. And what we're thinking is going to happen is, at some point, it's going to make a right-hand turn. And you can kind of see that in the official National Hurricane Center track. The point at which it makes that right-hand turn will have everything to do with whether or not it's going to come into contact with the topography of Cuba. Here's the catch. As it goes over the topography of Cuba, that will help tear the storm apart. But if it does that, it's...
But, yada, 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 yada. And as he goes on. Now, let's compare that to what was happening, a report that came from the National Weather Service, Miami, Florida, at 11 p.m., so that's 11 in the evening, on Monday, September the 10th, 2001. It reads, there may be some fluctuations in intensity over the next 24 to 36 hours as the inner eye wall collapses and the outer one takes over. Global models suggest that Erin, that's Hurricane Erin, could become a very vigorous extratropical system around the end of the forecast period, and the official forecast does not show as much weakening as indicated by the ship's guidance. Large swells generated by Erin will likely be a hazard along the northeast U.S. coast during the next couple of days. So there was a hurricane heading towards New York on the evening of Monday, September the 10th, that was ramping itself up to the highest point that it actually managed as a hurricane, and yet no big hoo-ha, nothing was happening. What does anyone else think of that?
Well, it tells me, something about their understanding. The contrast with, especially this Hurricane Irma, that, it's like, where's Waldo? Where is it going here? Is it going there? Oh, we have no way of knowing where exactly the hurricane's going to go. Well, if you have a hurricane going straight towards New York City for 4 days, and, why doesn't it apply to that one? Like, how do they know if it's going to turn around, which day, and is it going to stall out and flood Manhattan with a storm surge? No discussion of that, no concern, no voluntary evacuations, no mandatory evacuations, no mention of evacuations. That tells me something. They have to be kind of 100% sure of what the hurricane's going to do in order to not warn anybody.
Very interesting. And especially because these particular hurricanes that they're ramping up a lot of fear around at the moment, all the rhetoric around it is around global warming. The Hurricane Harvey that went over the island of Baruba and it went over Texas, didn't it, and caused all the problems there.
Yeah, it just stopped there and just rained, and that happens right inside the coast of North Carolina. Hurricanes don't necessarily make landfall. There's been several in the past couple of years that just stall out off the coast, and they dump lots and lots and lots of rain.
Yeah,
but nobody ever talks about those.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I heard the Prime Minister of Baruba and Antigua. What was his name again? Gaston Brown. And when he was questioned on a prominent radio station over here called Radio 4, BBC Radio 4 nonetheless, he was asked, well, do you think that this is, the effects of global warming, climate change? Yeah, because they don't call it global warming anymore, do they? Climate change? Oh, yes, he said. Yes, this is definite evidence of climate change.
Well, it is, because we didn't have hurricanes last year. We may have had a bunch the year before. It changes from year to year. In other words, the climate's different every year.
Yes, yeah. I think what they're trying to say is man-made.
Isn't it called weather?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they can't really predict what's going to happen in 2 weeks, much less 20 years.
So why are they changing our taxes and making us use special light bulbs? Because weather's outside. Yeah,
I've got a good reputation for the issue of global warming or whatever causing Hurricane Harvey.
Yeah.
And if you heat up, if you talk about this warmer air is heating up the ocean, think of how long it would take you to hold a hairdryer over your bathtub of cold water to heat it up. But even a 10-degree change in the air temperature, it's going to be 0.00000000001 degree temperature change in the water. A big sea turtle, doing backflips and turning up the water is going to create a bigger effect. Mixing the top water, surface temperature with something down below.
That's what I love about you, Dr. Wood, is that you always manage to find a brilliant sort of analogy that blows their ideas out of the water, literally. Out of the cold water, yeah. And another interesting thing about Hurricane Erin that you show in your book is that, it starts sort of coming apart a little bit just before it reassembles itself and then steams towards New York. And it seems to sort of be falling apart a little bit, and then it gets itself onto the
magnetic line?
The line of magnitude of the Earth, yeah. What was it?
Yeah, magnetism.
15. Yeah, and as soon as it's within there, that's when it seems to sort of ramp up again and steam on up to New York.
It's like a big train getting on some really nice, well lubricated tracks, and just coasting downhill.
Yeah, it seems as if there's something that kind of helped it along its way by being on that trajectory. And that's really interesting that you spotted that and pointed that out, because
and also when it sort of like makes that quick turn, it's like a train jumping the rails or making a tight turn and spitting sparks around the turn.
Yeah,
and you see the strange magnetic disturbance as well. But here's another reason why that it very well could be correlated instead of just coincidence, is that a hurricane is like a huge Tesla coil. That's an electrical field. Remember, electricity and magnetism are different sides of the same coin, as well as gravity. Like hydroelectric power plants are, turning magnetism into electricity.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
And so if you have this big electrical field of the Tesla coil going along a magnetic line of the Earth, if it starts moving perpendicular to that, you're going to get some weird effects. For whatever reason, it jumps the tracks.
So the field effects that could be coming from the hurricane would have an effect, would be affected by the fact that it was on the magnetic line.
Well, it's an electrical field. And if the magnetic field is constant or fairly constant, then the hurricane can be fairly constant. That follows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
With the exception of, the water temperatures may vary here and there, or the air temperatures or air pressure may vary. But those two things, if one is constant, the other one could very easily, it's foreseeable that it would be constant.
Right.
Or it could be. If it was going perpendicular to that, you wouldn't think it would be gaining speed.
Yeah. And, I mean, you've shown as well that the field effects from the hurricane, from Hurricane Erin on 9/11 were being felt at the airports.
Right. All three major airports around the New York City area, Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK airports, all reported thunder. Dry thunder.
Dry thunder, yeah. So there was thunder, but no rainstorms occurring.
Right. And they often know, people who are paying attention know when a hurricane's coming their way because the birds head for cover or leave town. I remember that with Hurricane Wilma. They were saying it was going to go up towards New Orleans, but then people in Fort Myers, Florida, were reporting that no birds. So, yeah, that's where it's going to go. The birds know because they can sense the field effects and know when to head for cover.
Interesting stuff.
And spiders do, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have certain fibers in their webs that sense barometric pressure changes and so forth. And they strum them and they collect information. Then they know when to pack up their web and head for cover, so they can recycle their web so they don't get drenched.
Wow,
clever.
So they surf the web then.
It's what?
They surf the web. That was
yeah.
And looking at the pictures in your book of Hurricane Erin, this is a very sizable mass. Probably encompassing like pretty much the whole of the eastern seaboard. Yeah.
Yeah, the field effects would for sure.
But if that had made land, that would have, not only New York would have been
flooded,
affected, but the whole of the East Coast. So you would have thought that they would have been talking about this a lot more.
Or even the possibility, if it's a possibility. They love to ramp these things up and they tune into our station and watch, and they have all sorts of graphics all over the place, all over the screen, and making it look like it's something serious is happening.
That's a really good point there, Dr. Wood. This is Hesher, by the way. It's almost a money-making opportunity for the entertainment news. The news channels out there to not take the opportunity to do a little bit of what they do best, which is spread fear when there's something like that coming towards it. And I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the path of Hurricane Erin. Over at checktheevidence.com. There's a good graphic of it if anyone out there doesn't have the book in front of them. But you can see September 7th, 8th, 9th, it's approaching the New York area, and then it gets stronger between the 9th and the 11th. It's a really interesting path, and the way that it, just like you said, it takes a turn, it almost spins, almost does a 180, and then goes right back up the coast. And why was nobody being told about this? Because,
it slowed down on the 11th, and it was the closest to New York City. I'm not talking about the eye exactly, but the whole outer bands and the field effects were being felt there. It was actually raining in Cape Cod.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm looking at the specs on Category 3 hurricanes right here. They can have winds of up to from 111 to 100 and almost 130 miles per hour. Buildings that lack solid foundations usually get destroyed. Gable end roofs get peeled off. Manufactured homes are usually suffer severe and irreparable damage. Flooding near coast, destroying smaller structures. I mean, this would be a huge thing if it actually hit ground in the New York area.
Worse than that. If it just, because it slowed down to almost a standstill, and then actually it was the afternoon of the 11th that it started to turn and head out of town. But if it didn't start to head out of town, if it just stayed there, just a few more hours, the storm surges would have flooded Manhattan. It didn't need to come ashore. It would have flooded JFK Airport and the whole area, because Manhattan's just about at sea level.
Right, and I imagine that would cause a total power loss, and in an area like that would be hard to imagine.
And you at least want to get the people out of the hospitals, and that's what I mean. The voluntary evacuation notice, just in case, because you can't evacuate 8 million people or however many there are in Manhattan in 1 hour.
Absolutely not. I mean, even in Florida. Sorry, I was just saying real quick. Even in Florida right now. Look at the traffic. Look at the traffic in Georgia and Florida this week with the hurricanes. I mean, you can't do that in a day.
Right. A few hours ago, they said if you haven't left yet, don't. It's too late. Hunker down, because you're going to get stuck in your car in the middle of the freeway, and who knows what'll happen to you. Because to drive out of Florida, it's like 600 miles or so. It's a long way.
Hmm. And like you were saying there, Hesher, they jump on any opportunity to make a big deal and to try and pull this kind of emotional feel from from a weather report, or they try and use such emotive language. And there was a report from a CNN reporter who'd gone to one of the sort of centers where people had been rescued from their homes from Hurricane Harvey, I think it was. And I'll just play this little clip because it just amused me in a sad way that this woman, the reporter really got her comeuppance by asking such a ridiculous, emotive question to this poor woman who suffered in the bad weather.
Now you're with your children. We've heard of stories of mothers trying to save their children from the rushing waters. Can you tell us how that was?
Through 4 feet of water to go get them food on the first day. Yeah, that's a lot of shit. But y'all sitting here, y'all trying to interview people during their worst times. Like, that's not the smartest thing to do. Like, people are really breaking down, and y'all sitting here with cameras and microphones trying to ask us what the fuck is wrong with us.
So I'm so
and
sorry,
you really trying to understand with the microphone still in my face, with me shivering cold, with my kids wet, and you still putting a microphone in my face.
Sorry.
And
excellent. Let's hand it to that lady. That was terrific.
Yeah, good for her. Yeah, because that's it. Yeah, I can remember.
She didn't get distracted from the most important thing in her life.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, she said it like it was. You stupid woman standing here with your big stupid microphone. I've had the worst day of my life trying to protect my kids, and all you can do is tell me how bad you feel. Ridiculous. I can remember years ago when we first moved to this area, there had been some serious flooding going on. And I can remember seeing a reporter standing with her rain gear on and her wellies, and there was water rushing past her wellies, and people's homes had been flooded. And I'm just thinking, of course people are going to be feeling awful. And here you are, this reporter in your nice little rain outfit, trying to kind of speak in that kind of, oh, I do feel terribly sorry for everyone kind of voice. But at the end of it, they pack up and go home to their dry homes. It is just done to try to get this kind of motive. Yeah, for the, to sell the news, and news and weather have become commodities to be sold to the public these days, haven't they?
So you'd think they'd be, drooling and chomping at the bit to do the same thing with Aaron. Some of the New Jersey beaches were closed because of the storm surge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Undertow.
Ah, really? Right. So
they had to close the beach.
And they put all the naval ships out to sea, didn't they? They didn't want them in the harbour.
Yep, because they're safer out to sea.
Mm.
And also, it was the longest, time-wise, hurricane of the season.
Right. So that contributed to it having actually more of an accumulated cyclonic activity than Hurricane Katrina.
Mm. And I believe that they actually used Hurricane Erin as a sort of specimen hurricane. They were doing lots of experiments and things on it. So you'd think that
I don't know that I don't have any evidence of that, but you can speculate, and that's fine.
Right. I was just thinking that if they had, they were collecting data like that, you'd think that after these years they'd have a bit more idea. Perhaps what they're going to do.
Yeah, this Irma thing. Oh, is it? It's like that missing, supposedly missing Malaysian airline. Where's Waldo today?
Yeah.
And is it here? Oh, maybe it's over here. Maybe it's over there. Every day they were just telling people to look elsewhere. It was just stories. There's no evidence that anything was based on. And, they supposedly have different programs that say where the hurricane's going to go, but it was different every day. Mm-hmm. And so, doesn't that mean that you can't predict hurricanes? If you can't predict hurricanes, go back to Hurricane Erin. Why weren't people evacuated or warned?
Because when I put when I've looked at some things about Hurricane Erin, they're just saying, there's an area of low pressure here which is going to move Hurricane Erin out over up
or high pressure
here, or high pressure. Yeah.
But they thought that was on day 1. Then they thought that on day 2. Then they thought that on day 3. Then they thought that on day 4. Wait a minute, they're out of space.
Yeah,
better.
It still didn't move. It was still heading straight for them. So why?
But still, how can they be 100% sure?
Yeah.
Just like there was a high pressure system just off the Atlantic coast that was going to supposedly move Irma someplace, but then it went the other way. They thought it was going to go up the east coast of Florida instead of the west coast.
Mm.
So there's sort of two aspects there. There's why, if they have the technology supposedly to track these hurricanes and predict its course, were they not telling people? But also you've got the media not telling people either. So the information was there, but it wasn't being reported on, because obviously You found.
Well, it was there, and they reported it here and there, but it wasn't hyped at all. It was just some of the stations didn't mention it at all, and some just, well, but it's not a problem.
So then, did they not want New York particularly to be evacuated on that particular day?
You have to ask them. I mean, it's a good guess, but it's, we can't know that for sure, but we can infer various information and each of us make our own conclusions from the evidence.
Yeah.
That it would sure seem like they wanted people watching the TV set rather than evacuating.
Yeah. Because sure, if they had been evacuating people, would that have been around a similar time, or would that have been a couple of days before?
Probably would have been the day before.
Yeah.
And announcing that, maybe, and then, by the morning of 9/11, the last, information of if it's mandatory, or so. It's.
So, and it does really make you wonder. It just so happened that this hurricane moved away at a very crucial time before creating mass damage of hundreds of miles.
Flooding.
Yeah, and yet, even with the hurricanes of this season, with the amount of sort of preparation that has gone into evacuating people from those areas, it's just that particular hurricane that they didn't evacuate people and it moved away. That is
right.
A very...
And it was going on a straight line for 4 days.
Yeah. So with the ones that they've been now, they sort of, like you say, they're guessing where it's going to go, but still evacuating people in its path, of the potential path. And yet, Erin, it was underplayed, but it was gunning for New York, and nobody was evacuated, but it just so happened that it moved out of the way. That is a number of coincidences that happened to culminate, and we're probably quite lucky that in respect of the hurricane and the flooding, that it didn't, because like you say, it would have flooded the whole of Manhattan and probably a lot more area besides.
It's sort of beyond lucky.
Yeah, it was the storm surge was causing extra big waves and lapping up, and even in the evacuation of people from the World Trade Center area when they're on boats. If you look at those images, there's huge waves. It's very turbulent kind of water. But that doesn't get talked about, as well as the folks from the space station.
Yes.
Frank Culberson's looking down. He got his camera down there and said, "Well, look up and down the East Coast, see if I see anything else." So he had to actually dodge the hurricane with his camera or they clipped that out of the video to say, "See New York City down there and all the carnage."
Yeah.
But he doesn't mention the hurricane. He could have at least said, "Well, they're lucky that this didn't hit them too."
Yeah, why did he not mention it? He was in the perfect position. He had the perfect view of what was happening.
The video sounded edited too, in segments. But who knows if that's just the transmission, breaks or what? But they work for somebody, and they have rules. What they can and can't talk about.
But it just sounds like there was some sort of D-notice on that particular hurricane, though. Nobody.
That's a
could
good
talk
way
about.
of putting it. It was a D-notice. They didn't totally deny that it was there. You just hope nobody would notice.
They weren't going to talk it up.
There was also that episode we had with Joyce Riley. Maybe you want to tell them about that.
Oh yeah, where a character calls in and he says, "Can you hear me?" Yeah. Judy, you lied about this. You lied. He starts foaming at the mouth. Saying Hurricane Aaron. I live in Florida, and Hurricane Aaron, came down here, X number of years ago. Well, they use the same name every 7 years, unless they retire it because it's a note like Hurricane Andrew or something, or Katrina probably got retired too. That name, but they recycle the names, so that doesn't mean anything. And then Joyce Riley comes on and says, "Well, the things like that are documented. If you're the only one who has it documented." I said, go to the website of the National Hurricane Center and look, they have it documented. But she muted my statement.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Like, what motivation would she have to try to hide the hurricane?
Mm-hmm.
And had me muted for a while she went on and on, creating skepticism about this hurricane I made up. That was bizarre. Yeah. And I talked with her the night before in the pre-interview about the hurricane. It's too nice to say, Ms. Riley, I'm a little bit concerned about your memory issues here.
Yeah.
But I was too nice.
Yeah, I remember hearing that phone call with that guy. He kind of goes off the hizzle a bit, doesn't he?
he's like drooling.
Yeah. You're just making it all up because I was around when Hurricane Erin hit. And yeah, like you say, there have been several Hurricane Erins. Yeah,
every 7 years, and you can look on the National Hurricane website and see the future names, that are lined up. Mm-hmm. Well, like for example, after Katia, that's the one in Mexico. There's Lee, Maria, Nate, Ophelia, Philippe, Rena, Sean, Tammy, Vince, and Whitney. If we get through the alphabet. That's this for this year, and then they started with another episode next year. Alberto, Burl, Chris, Debbie. So they have them all pre-planned years in advance.
So on that particular interview you just talked about there, did she mute the part where you were telling people where they could find that information?
Yes. Yes. And had this other guy come on who's from Canada and say, well, I don't think NASA's into conspiracy theories. And they just were hamming it up as best they could. And he said it was perfectly clear on 9/11. Well, it was directly above, but there's an airplane flying over New Jersey that took a picture, and you can see off in the horizon the storm clouds.
Yeah, people obviously just don't want to look at the facts.
Yep, and that's beginning to be a bigger and bigger problem in our culture, is the confusion between facts and something else, whether it's a story somebody wants to promote or if it's just speculation. You got to keep facts separate from these other things.
Yeah. Well, I think even the idea of critical thinking is being lost as the generations go on. People's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and more focused on little devices in their hands.
Do you know what Steve told me today as well? That he'd heard, or did you read it? Or heard it on the radio, that Cambridge and Oxford University are thinking of or definitely doing it.
They've announced they're going to phase out handwritten exams because, and the reason given was the examiners cannot read the handwriting of the kids these days. So they're going to turn it all over to digital.
They must be all doctors then.
Well, they fail handwriting then, and fail their exam if you can't read the answer.
Maybe they should teach them how to write then.
Yeah. I understand that's been phased out too.
Yes.
Like cursive writing.
Yeah.
You guys are using common sense over there. That's not going to work in 2017.
Oh.
It's not so common anymore.
No.
Yeah, uncommon sense, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing for listeners out there to realize is if they fall into this, easy way of like looking up on the web to see what the answer is to 2 + 3, pretty soon they can easily be reprogrammed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With whatever. That's what I don't like about electronic books instead of printed books, is you can change reality real quickly for people.
And you can take them out
definitely.
of circulation.
And I know in this country they've definitely been the standard of handwriting is dreadful. And handwriting used to be, I mean, in the Japanese arts, martial arts, handwriting is one of the arts. You become a swordsman and a calligrapher, and these were considered, part of how to round yourself as a human being.
It's a centering activity, though, isn't it? You're focused. You're focused and
meditation activity. Yeah.
Attention to detail, whereas typing doesn't have that same effect, does it? Because most people touch type and they're just looking at the screen. They're not looking at what the hands are doing. So there's a disconnection between what your hands are doing and what you're looking at. Even though what you're looking at is the stuff that you're typing, there is that detachment. And you're going back to Dr. Wood's point about electronic books. It's been proven now, they've done studies that people take in less information when they're reading off a screen than when actually reading a proper book. I really don't like reading electronic books. I'd much rather have a physical object in front of me to read, because you can... When you
read a printed book, you own the knowledge. You're not just a spectator. It's not a spectator sport. You own the knowledge. You take the information in, you contemplate it, and work in what you know about the world with that information.
But there are some advantages for ebooks, though, because, for example, I use an ebook reader when I'm driving, which means that I can actually get through a lot more material that I wouldn't have a chance to listen to when I'm doing a lot of driving. So ebooks are not, there are certain uses for ebooks.
Right.
Yeah, but that's an audio book. That's a different thing than actually read.
There are certain advantages to ebooks because audiobooks take up a lot of storage space. So if you've got an ebook reader like I have on my phone.
Okay. I see what you're talking now. Yeah.
So I accept that, as Dr. Wood have already discussed this, that the experience of reading an ebook is very much different to reading a paper book. But in other words, I would never favour the phasing out of paper books because everyone has an ebook reader, but not for that reason. But I think ebooks have their place.
I agree. Like I often have email read.
So, yeah, exactly. Some of the points that have been made but I don't think ebooks can be misused. But then again, paper books can be used to be filled with propaganda and and they be printed cheap and so forth.
But I think that go ahead.
It's a vehicle, and it's how we utilise that vehicle is the main issue.
And I think going back to the handwriting issues, it's a bit of a problem. I mean, I had an experience quite recently when I was doing some interviewing of candidates for stuff, and I had to take a lot of handwritten notes, and I literally had not taken voluminous handwritten notes for 10 years, something like that, where I had been in a situation where I had to write a lot of handwritten notes on the spot, and I was quite concerned that I wouldn't be able to keep up with the notes I needed to take.
We're losing you, Andrew, there.
Can you hear me? Where did I get lost?
Taking handwritten notes.
So I was doing handwritten notes, and I needed to get everything down, and I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get everything down because I hadn't done any handwritten notes for about 10 years, of any volume, because I use a keyboard all the time, the smartphone to type messages and things, and the laptop and all of that. So there is this. I mean, but what if we don't, if we start using electronic communications more, are we still going to use handwritten communications as well? Or are we going to get succeeded? It's a bit like saying, well, it's a bit of a shame in one sense that we don't use papyrus anymore and we have to use paper because.
We're losing you again. It's a shame that we don't use what anymore?
Papyrus, rather than paper.
Ah, right. Yeah.
So in other words, there is this problem of the progress in technology and the convenience it offers against certain skills being lost. As I think discussing.
There's pluses and minuses.
Right.
But the issue of having too much propaganda in a book, I think it's we have more of a safeguard against it in a printed book than an e-book, because printed books, you choose what to take. You're evaluating the information more and scrutinizing it instead of swallowing a hook, line, and sinker.
Well, potentially, I think you can still do that with a paper book. It depends on the context and the way in which you're reading it and how much attention you're paying to it.
Right.
But I think a book like yours, which is a book that you must study, it's not a book you're going to just read casually. You're going to approach it with a very serious intent, and I think there is a difference.
I guess that's what I'm thinking in terms of is my book. Why I never want to make it an ebook, because then it turns into quote mining and word searching and what did you say about this? What did you say about that? Rather than trying to understand what happened.
Don't forget also there's the issue of it being erased remotely, which happened with the Kindle version of 1984.
Ironically.
That is true.
Some years ago. They erased it remotely off people's Kindles. So anything that's electronic can be presumably erased remotely.
And now they brought it back as like a sort of not antidote, but like in defiance of Trump. That there's all these sort of sort of Clinton-y leftists all go 1984, it's real, man. Yeah, crazy.
Isn't that funny? They're all up on the conspiracy theory in 1984 now, but they only use it in like bumper sticker slogan sort of ways.
Yeah. It's like, catch the fuck up.
There's a particular quote I wanted to read. It was from this article called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And they mean the internet in general. This fellow writes, "Once I was a scuba diver in the sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski."
Perfect.
Yeah. Right, we're going to go for a short break here. And before we do, Steve's got a little bit of a lead into the song that we're going to play for the break here. And it relates to someone who's just died.
Well, someone who's just died, did you say? Well, so a guy of my age, I'm sort of early 50s. It was very sad to hear the news last Sunday, I think it was, that Walter Becker had passed away. Walter Becker was the founding member of Steely Dan and made a lot of fine music, and we're just going to play a nice little song of theirs, which is called Kid Charlemagne, which is from the album which is called The Royal Scam, so it kind of ties into what we've been discussing tonight, a right royal scam. And that album cover is actually a guy asleep on a radiator, dreaming about two twin towers fighting each other, but they're actually got sort of Hydra lizard heads on them. Don't know if anyone's familiar with that album. But the track we're going to play is actually based on a guy called Oswald Stanley, who we will be discussing with Neil Sanders very shortly. He's coming on to discuss his brilliant book about the Charles Manson. And if anyone knows, that Osley Stanley was the sound man for the Grateful Dead, and he also was the guy who was responsible for manufacturing the LSD that poisoned the Woodstock, the burn acid sort of thing. So, Nick, if you want to play that for us.
And
Walter Becker, R.I.P.
And just for Dr. Wood and Andrew and everybody else, just if you go to the show page, you can listen to the tune there. Okay, here we go.
And mute your mics.
Yeah.
While the music played, you walk by candlelight. Those San Francisco nights were the best in town. Just by chance, you crossed the diamond with the pearl. You turned it on the world. That's when you turned the world around. Did you feel like Jesus? Did you realize that you were a champion in their eyes? On the hill, the stuff was laced with kerosene, but yours was kitchen clean. Everyone stopped to stare at your Technicolor motorhome. Every apron had your number on the wall. You must have had it all. You go to LA on a dare and you go it alone. Could you live forever? Could you see the day? Could you feel your whole world fall apart and fade away? Get along, keep shining me. Get along, keep shining me. Now your patrons have all left you in the red. Your low rent friends are dead. This life can be very strange. All those Dago freaks who used to paint the face, they join the human race. Some things will never change. Son, you are mistaken. You are obsolete. Look at all the white men on the street. Get along, keep shining me. Get along, keep shining me. Clean this mess up, else we'll all end up in jail. Those testers and the scale, just get it all out of here. Is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car. I think the people down the hall know who you are. Careful what you carry, 'cause the man is wise. You are still an outlaw in their eyes. Get along, keep shining me. Get along, keep shining me.
So that was Kid Charlemagne by Steely Dan, and R.I.P. to Walter. He will be sadly missed. Welcome back to part 2 of Type 1 Radio Lounge here, broadcasting on Type1Radio.com. Welcome back. Is everybody here now?
And I'm back. Sorry, I unmuted and then
I'm here.
Background.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Excellent. Roll call.
Right. So, getting back to the subject we were talking about earlier about the fact that Erin suddenly found the Hurricane Erin on 9/11 suddenly found itself on the line of the magnetic line of the Earth. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a line going towards magnetic north.
Right. And so I'm just reading a quote here from your book from chapter 19, Earth's magnetic field. And it says, the magnetometer readings from the 6 different research stations in northern Alaska reveal anomalous changes in the Earth's magnetic field at the exact moments that key events were taking place in New York on 9/11. So this is linking actually to the actual towers and the demise of the towers as well, isn't it?
Yes. It's just, coincidence or what?
It's interesting to note, isn't it? We don't exactly know. We can't say, well, it's because this, and this, and here are all the answers. But it's just interesting to know, as we said in the first part of the show, it's just so interesting to note and completely baffles all of us as to why, especially in this day and age with all what's going on at the moment with hurricanes in America, it just blows our mind that nobody was mentioning or making a fuss about this hurricane. And again, it's just really interesting to note that something odd was going on with the magnetometer readings.
Right, and I sort of joke, but because of the coincidence, but there's 3 different times reported for when the North Tower got its plane-shaped hole. They're all a few seconds apart, and I like to joke saying, well, I can tell which one's right. Look at the magnetometer dip. It lines up between the second and third one. Or first and second one. It's right between them, the 3.
So when the first hole appeared, by whatever means,
there was a buildup of the magnetic field, and then it reversed right after the hole appeared.
Ah. And then again on Tower 1, which was the second tower to get a hole.
No, Tower 1 was the first one to get a hole, and then Tower 2, and then they reversed when they right.
Mm.
The reverse when they did what?
The reverse is their demise.
Okay.
Yeah, Tower 2 went first, and then Tower 1. But then the magnetometer data was just haywire after that all afternoon, and that was when the hurricane was changing course. It was turning off and away from that magnetic field line, and starting to head back out to sea.
So, in a repelling, if this is like a electromagnetics, was there what was making that move in a different way to where trajectory? We can only speculate.
Yeah, we can't say what did. Right, we can only speculate, but I think it's important to stick to what the facts are, and the facts are the precise parallel between the various events. Like, not much was happening in the magnetic field, and there's this, gradual dip. The North Tower gets its hole, and then it goes back up, and then it starts to dip down again. The South Tower gets its hole, and it goes back up. And then later on, when the South Tower goes poof, it does this dive, And then when the North Tower goes poof, it does this big dive. Then it goes haywire all afternoon. And that just precisely lined up with when the hurricane was making that turn off of the magnetic field line.
So the hurricane was hanging around for the whole time that the towers were in distress, and until the towers demised. And then once the towers demised, the hurricane kind of went, I'm bored, I'm going away.
It started heading out of town. Yep.
Yeah. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, the show's over, I'm off.
Yep. Yeah. Reporting for duty. Okay, job well done. Go home now. But is it just a coincidence, or what? We have to know, more cause and effect. But what we can say is that's when these things happened.
Yeah.
That if that is a coincidence, it is a very, very bizarre one.
Yes, and
particularly because of it, this particular hurricane being so underreported.
Yes, that too. But just it's so tempting to go with assumptions. But when I first discovered this hurricane, I hadn't studied cold fusion, all that stuff. I was just some, but I was thinking, well, why is this thing underreported? What can hurricanes do? And that's when I realized it's like a big Tesla coil. And then I mean, and that's a fact that a hurricane, it makes this big static field around it.
Yep.
Because it's like a big Tesla coil.
And you get very bizarre, anomalous effects from...
when things interact with it.
Yeah, when materials interact with that static field.
It's the same kind of thing with tornadoes. Tornadoes actually dustify things. They can slice a house in two. Half the house will be dustified, and the other half is a stack of paper sitting on the bookshelf, and it's not even ruffled. So wind doesn't do that.
Oh, just as a side note, have you noticed how many movies over the past, particularly over the past couple of years, have dustified buildings going on in them?
That is interesting, how that's become a phenomenon, and you would think they'd use the word. Maybe they do by now, because it's a specific phenomenon.
But the CGI effects of these buildings going away in films, such as like San Andreas, in maybe some of the Avenger movies, knowing that's one where quite a lot of buildings just go away. Whereas before, you would get a building collapsed.
It'll go poof.
Yeah, whereas the visual effects have the billowing effect. They have all the dust going on. They even have all the people being covered in dust and loads of paper going on too.
Yeah,
it's almost like the normalizing what people saw on that day and reinforcing that in movies.
And I don't know if anyone watched Fringe, which was like a mini series. Well, in that there was an episode where a building just disappeared, and there was a clip at the end of it where she goes, "Conspiracy nuts are going to have a field day with this one."
Or field effects.
And then and then bizarrely, she goes into a different parallel universe where the Twin Towers are still there.
I know. Yeah, that was very odd. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like to make sure it's not too obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very bizarre the way that they do put these things into movies, and it's all the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, we know we've said this before, but it's called programming for a reason. But what you watch on your TV, but that so much includes the news. I don't know if you're aware, Dr. Wood, of a man called Robert Stewart, and he has made a very interesting. He has a very interesting blog, and there are a couple of sort of short documentary things, not documentaries, but talks that he's put up, and a little interview that he's done with a group of other people. And his work is regarding a BBC documentary which came out called "Saving Syria's Children," and there are things going on within this documentary which make it such that it seems to have been it's more
pre-planned.
It's a drama, going on rather than real life, and that they seem to have been staging a lot of the what's going on as a supposed news item, so that. I mean, and that to me is his work is like your own. He really goes into detail about things, and the BBC just ignore him basically because they don't really want to. They'd rather just ignore him than engage with him because he's so on the money about it, and he's really showing up this particular item. And the more I see.
So how you cover that up and divert people away from it, you have it's like thermite was to divert people away from looking at the evidence that I present. There's a similar thing, I'm just hearing it in your story, is like Sandy Hook. You get conspiracy nutcases promoting that as all fake, so it chases people away from actually considering that in another scenario.
Yes, completely. Yeah. The
thermite decoy.
Yeah. Exactly. And
isn't it interesting that both subjects there come from one source, i.e. Fetzer.
Oh.
Which? He's sort of like promoting sort of the big sort of Sandy Hook conspiracy.
Right. He promotes anything but the facts.
Yeah, and
but he weaves them into his story to distort them into something else, like nuke bombs on 9/11. And thermite and whatever, anything but the evidence, anything but the facts.
Yeah, don't look at the facts. Look at this instead.
But it works quite well.
I have such a hard time with this in my chat room sometimes, Dr. Wood. I'll have people come in and your name will come up or 9/11 will come up. And it's like every single one Tourette's. Of them. Yeah, it really is. It turns into a Tourette's syndrome in the chat room. And I'm always asking them, I used to be really confrontational with people like that back in the day. But now I asked them, I said, well, have you read her book? They never even answer yes or no. You know what I mean? They always just go to, well, I saw this video about her, or, I saw this debunk or that debunk, and then they go back to talking about mini nukes. I mean, it's amazing that after all these years, it's still so hardwired in
That's why it's so important for people to own their own information. Why I want stuff presented in a book, so you can own it. You the information. You contemplate it. You think about it. And it becomes your knowledge, not, playing spectator sport of, well, let's see what Fetzer says. Let's see what Wood says. Let's see what Jones says. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We got this one competing against that one. It's a spectator sport. They aren't owning the information. If they were responsible for determining what the truth was, it would be different. But playing the spectator sport, they can always blame, well, I didn't know. I thought Fetzer was right.
Yeah. It's definitely a subject that triggers people.
Oh, yeah.
As they've been programmed
Go to your safe space.
Yeah, I badmouth Fetzer and people blow up left and right. But it's like, I know what that guy's been up to for a long time now. I know what Veterans Today is all about. And, there's not a single veteran on the staff, first of all. So, right there at the name, you get your first problem. And, it's just amazing to me. And I appreciate what you said about owning your knowledge because, it means a lot to actually have your book, be able to have my treeware, my physical highlighter, and my page markers, and go through there and write in the margins and highlight stuff. And I keep digital notes too, so I can reference things like videos and stuff like that. So you can really come up with a nice body of knowledge just by owning that book or any book.
And it's what you know that you know that you know. It isn't just like, well, I assume that person's telling me the truth. Mm. And that's what happens with why the media can do what it does, because people assume to believe it, to believe the opposite of it, or same with alternative media. That's even more programming than the regular network media. There's very little scrutiny involved.
That's very true.
Mm. It was thermite. It was thermite. Okay, what was it? But it was thermite. You got to first define what it is before you can say, anything else.
And there are. I mean, you list in your book how the thermite story just doesn't work. I don't believe that anyone who promotes the thermite story has ever come up with anything that shows how your work doesn't work.
Well, they can't, because you can't disprove facts.
Yeah.
And
that's the beauty of it.
And also with the mini nukes, because if there was any type of nuclear device going off, people would not have been able to walk out of that building like they did.
Yeah, they looked up and saw blue sky and walked out on their own power.
Yeah.
Not just that building, but also Building 3 had, I think, 14 people surviving there.
And it's like the sort of molten metal for going on for weeks. It's like, well, if that had have been going, that would have surely melted and gone down into the subway system and flooded Manhattan in itself. So
yeah,
where
did it go?
If the bathtub was that fragile that they were having difficulty getting that excavator in on the cleanup, then how is it surviving? Is it 1 million tons of building being?
But see, the problem is that the folks start out with the answer and then try to work backwards. And that's, I think, how our school systems are training people to just grab an answer. They have no idea what that's an answer to. Is the answer 27 the correct answer? To what? Yeah. They just latch on this answer. Thermite did it. What was it that thermite did?
So it's like being presented with a multiple choice question where you've got A, B, C, D, but you're not given what the question is. You've just got to tick
what the
a box.
Problem is.
Yeah, you've just got to tick a box.
Exactly, and if the purpose of that is, you first have to establish, true scientific approach to, forensics or anything. Establish what happened, and only then will you know how it happened. You have to define what it is, what problem you're solving. And then after that is who did it and how they did it. So the statement of it was an inside job, they're stating who did it or before they know what happened and how it happened. But if you start out with that other approach, that's the true scientific method. And if you want to cover it up, what you do is you get people to skip that first step and argue over how it happened without defining what it was. So what you do by doing that is you lead people to assume what problem they're solving, and they're never solving the actual problem.
So, do you think that
that's slick?
At the time, so 2001, the internet is just sort of becoming widespread around the world, even though it's still really limited. And with the advent of conspiracy sites that go straight to the answer, that mindset was in the public. So
with anything, you plan the cover up before you plan the event.
Yeah. So this event was probably the first like internet sort of generation like world event. Yeah.
It's true in some ways, but I don't think that needed to be part of it. Whatever mode of communication people use would have been the thing. But I think the key is getting people to make an assumption, whether it's from the newspaper or TV or whatever, and get them to just then form teams and argue back and forth about how it happened without even discussing what it was. So they assume what it was.
Yes, but
so
you've got the sort of the newspapers and the media telling you what the official story is, but you've got
but they don't even say what happened. They immediately jump to who did it.
Exactly. And you've got
thermite did it, airplanes did it.
You've got
or terrorists with box cutters.
You've got the sort of Alex Jones, David Icke type people
corralling.
And sort of going against what the who did what. So you've got two camps not looking at what happened before.
Exactly. It's all about if you don't like the lie behind door number 1, we'll show you the lie behind door number 2. Thermite. If you don't like that lie, we'll show you the lie behind door number 3. Mini nukes. Whatever it is, they keep them looking at something behind the doors so they don't turn around and look at the wide open field of evidence behind them.
I'll tell you something else I feel anyway about your work, Dr. Wood, is that it is the gift that just keeps giving, because here we are now, how many years on? 16 years on. And as we've been discussing, the weather events which are prime in the news today are related to the work that you came up with regards to the demise of the towers on 9/11. So it's just constantly relevant. And it just gets more and more relevant. And I'm really pleased to see that so many more people are beginning to pick up on it. Work. Yeah, and get it finally after all this time. Because
as we said before, I think the key with what is in Dr. Wood's book and on the website and everything is that it really diffuses and destroys a number of the global scams in one stroke, really, because you've got all this global warming, climate change nonsense, and I've just sort of put that all my thoughts on that into a book that I'm just about to self-publish, which is basically, there's not a lot that's new in it because it's a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about for the last 10 years, and obviously Dr. Wood as well. So you've got all that climate change, global warming nonsense, which is driving a lot of the control mechanisms in terms of how, things are produced, manufactured in one sense, how communities are built, how they plan to make buildings, all these smart buildings, all of this stuff. You've got all that, based on assumptions. Which is based on assumptions which are wrong. Then you've got, obviously, the whole 9/11 global terrorism nonsense. That's all diffused and done with once you've read this book. And then you've got the free energy as well, because once you know that the towers were destroyed in a way which shows anomalous energy, the energy couldn't have come from anywhere except a free energy domain, if I can call it that. Once you realize that and you see that, you look at the change in those buildings from being solid objects to being powder in 10, 12 whatever seconds, 9, 10 seconds, you then realize, well, no, it wasn't thermite, it wasn't nukes, and it wasn't bombs, and it wasn't lasers. So what actually was it? And that's obviously on the cover of the book. So that then leads you into all the scammery behind, oil and fossil fuel and all of that. So that's why this is so important, and why myself and Dr. Wood have been banging on about it for the last, since we sort of first started doing bits and pieces together, which I think is like 10 years now, isn't it? Basically, just about.
Well, let me add one more thing, not just the information in there, but the method of gaining that information,
Yes.
the course in critical thinking.
Exactly, and that's what you said earlier on in the conversation tonight. They're also trying to sort of reduce the amount that is done by prescribing everything. In the UK we have the national curriculum. Over there you've got Common Core. It's all this sort of, do what we tell you to do, look at what we tell you to look at. You don't need to think about anything else, because frankly everything that you need to think about has been thought about for you already, and you just read off this card and here's all the information you need. And you said multiple choice tests. You've just got these choices. You don't need to worry about any other ones, because one of these is correct. You just got to work out which one it is.
Pick the best answer.
Pick the best answer and all of that. And so all of that together is if you can diffuse any or all of those, it's a big problem for the people that want things another way, for the people that want us all to be living in fear and living in ignorance, so that we can be controlled. And that's why this book is so important. This topic is so important, and why there is so much perception management, which is what you were talking about earlier on, around it. We've talked about, but you talked about Fetzer, and I'll add a few words here about Fetzer, in that
he's good.
He is. If you look at somebody like Fetzer, and there are, we could name quite a few other people, and as you perhaps some of you know in the group there, that I named a few other people in this book that I wrote or compiled over several years, over about 3 years. 9/11 Finding the Truth, which is free download from my website. What motivates these people? They're not politicians. Like Fetzer, for example, he's retired now. I think he's in his 70s. What motivates this guy? What motivates Richard Gage? Okay, so he gets maybe $30,000 a year salary. Perhaps that's the motivation. But it's really
100,000.
Yeah, whatever it is. But it's very difficult to identify the motives that some of these people have for actually being part of the cover-up. Stephen E. Jones, Fetzer, and then, for example, we don't know, do we? But I mean, I was going to go and mention this other thing that happened last year, because it was almost a year ago now that you did the talk in Toronto, wasn't it? Just about a year since you did that talk in Toronto with that group of 150 people, which was very successful. The one with Richard Syrett had kind of, I don't think he actually organised it, but he was coordinating it.
Yeah,
part of it, and that was very successful. And there's quite a good video. All the audio is a bit weak on that because they didn't have it settled properly. But then why I was bringing that up is that very peculiar thing happened, a couple of weeks later?
Yeah, I think it was a month later, the 3rd of October.
And there's this quite elderly woman who I'd never heard of before.
They tried to get somebody that looked like me.
Yeah, it was really weird. And she was probably in her late 60s, early 70s. And she was saying, I just want to do a talk about 9/11 randomly. And
and how stupid Judy Wood is.
Yeah. And this is some lady who I'd never heard of, never seen. And she's basically trying to do a public event as a debunk response to what you'd done a couple of weeks earlier. Because it was in Toronto, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just like right down the street from there.
Yeah.
But it was obviously she didn't address anything in my presentation.
No.
She's talking about laser beams from outer space and bizarre things. She's promoting that myth again.
And the video was very poor quality, wasn't it? And we didn't see the audience, did we? So we didn't know how many people were in the audience. But you find when I speak to people, they would never believe that. They would never believe that some lady in her late 60s would somehow have been quote unquote employed to do a debunk talk in the same town or the same area of town as you only a couple of weeks later. I mean, what's that about? How does that work? It's just you get this extreme peculiarity, and we've had that a few times, haven't we? With we could probably name one or two other events if we dressed through our memories. Like
Jerry Leapart pointed it out when we had our first major encounter where Fetzer had brought me on to that National Press Club to see his talk so that he could organize the Greg Jenkins interview thing.
Oh yeah.
And he goes off and hides, and he comes back at a particular point where they thought I'd be sinking, and I was mopping the floor with Jenkins, and Fetzer didn't know how to work that into the script. It wasn't according to script, but I like what Jerry Leapart said after that when Jenkins was trashed me. He said, "Isn't that the greatest compliment that they hired somebody who was funded by NSA? His graduate work was indeed funded in part by NSA. To do this. Isn't that a great compliment?"
Yeah. Yep, it really is.
Just on people skewing your work. A couple of weeks ago, I came across a guy called Richard Lighthouse.
Yeah.
I've heard of him recently as well. Yeah.
He's got his theory isn't really relevant. I don't necessarily, but he's got some of your work on his and
Yes.
telling people to read the book, but in order to. And he also categorizes it as a space beam again, which.
So he hasn't read the book.
Yeah.
And he advises people to go to Jones and Gage and people like this for more information on.
Well, I heard this. Somebody sent me this because it had mentioned Dr. Judy's name, and they sent me it thinking, somebody's mentioned Dr. Judy's name, and I listened to 8 minutes of this interview.
Yeah.
And that was more than enough. And I thought, well, is this a real name? Because his theory is that the universe blinks on and off, I think, 1 trillion times a second or something. So that you've got this blinking universe, I think he calls it, and then you've got this name Lighthouse. Is this a joke?
Yeah, I think.
I never even thought about it like that, but that just, totally.
and so let's just say he's right. Let's say the universe is blinking on and off 1 trillion times a second. How would you know? Do you care? When that sort of frequency, which you can't even perceive anyway, it's great. It's just irrelevant anyway.
Actually, he might be true. It might be true. I think isn't it the retina that or the back of the eyeball samples data at a very rapid rate, and it moves back and forth.
Sure, but it becomes
so according to your eyeball, it's sampling at a what do you call it? At a digital rate.
Well, when you get down to that, it takes you about a quarter of a second to perceive whatever you're looking at by the time it's been processed through your brain. So you're always living in the past, according to that. To that,
there's all sorts of stories you can distort from there.
Exactly. And that Lighthouse guy, it was just, I listened to 8 minutes, and like one of you said a couple of minutes ago, he's saying, go and read Dr. Judy Wood's book, and then go to Stephen E. Jones's website. And I'm thinking, okay, that's not muddle up, is it?
Why does Stephen E. Jones not have a book?
Yeah.
Well, he can't. He's illiterate, isn't he? Obviously.
Same with Gage. And
Steve's saying he hasn't coloured it in yet. That's
right. Yeah, that's about right, actually. Maybe now that adult colouring books have become fashionable, maybe they'll bring out books.
Yeah, the mind.
But with all of these folks, if they haven't filed any kind of court case, they have nothing to stand on. Because, for example, with Fetzer and Sandy Hook. If what he is saying is true and he hasn't filed a court case or taken it to the proper authorities, he's part of the cover-up of his own theory. And if it's not true, he's bogus. So either way is lose-lose. If you have what you believe is the truth and can prove it, you should take it to court or take it to the proper authorities. Yeah. And no one has done that.
Yeah,
except
it's like
have the conviction of your convictions.
And like with the 9/11 thing, April Gallup, who worked at the Pentagon, and the whole thing about her, she worked at the Pentagon, and she needed paperwork to get her baby to the nursery because she'd just come back to work, and she just pressed a button and bang, the Pentagon wall fell down. And anyway, she was going to sue the Pentagon or something like this. And anyway, Jones and
DRG,
tried to was kind of pushing her and goading her to do this, that, and the other. But they didn't put their name to anything. They got
Niels Harrit to do it, the Danish chemist.
Yeah,
he said it might have been thermite possibly at the World Trade Center or something in his affidavit, but we don't really know. It was something like that. And then she got sanctioned. April Gallup got sanctioned for her case being trivial.
Yeah, that's it. And the lawyers were fined $15,000.
I think they did some name calling to the judge, call them some effing names.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like they're begging to get reprimanded.
You can't go to court with nothing. You can't go to court with
but worse than that, they were calling the judge names, foul-mouthed names, as though they were begging to be
like contempt of court.
Yeah, and I think it was to blend in with my case, so people would think my case had been sanctioned.
Yeah.
And this is such a common tactic, right? For people to just show up on the scene and behave like goons and, make a lot of noise and try to attach your name or anyone else. I mean, we've seen this across the board with any sort of information movements that start to form in alternative media over the years, whether it's false flag attacks or what have you. It's like
fracking.
Anything like that, totally. Environmental issues, policy issues, war issues. I mean, we've spent a lot of time doing a lot of analysis on the Syrian conflict and comparing,
the White House.
Yeah, exactly. So we're comparing what our reporters on the ground are seeing and talking to people there and comparing that to what the mainstream media is doing and portions of the alternative media, the so-called alternative media are doing. And we see this all the time where people come in, start throwing punches, or they'll come in and be all, hugs and roses at first and seem like an advocate for something. And then their mood will darken or change immediately. And all of a sudden, yours
start
or
fights.
someone. Yeah, they start throwing punches. It's like a hockey team that hires someone who can't make goals or skate, but he can really throw punches good. So we see these people in the alternative media all the time, and a lot of them have been uncovered as paid agitators and agents. I mean, there's just so many examples of this. So for someone to think that, it's odd that somebody would masquerade as you or someone who's, looking to be like some sort of counter lecturer who's following you around, it's not really that cloak and dagger. I mean, there's plenty of examples of this happening.
Right, Fetzer was the first case I saw. They pretend to be supportive of your work, and then they start presenting it, and then they put all sorts of stuff in it in the presentation that you didn't say, so that it gets mixed in as though I had said. Like Fetzer goes, "Oh, space beams, that's close enough." No, I never said that. And it takes off from there, and Fetzer is then seen as carrier of this information. Well, various other folks have been doing that too. Some may be well-meaning, but it still has the same counter effect that they present my work with errors in it, and that gets associated with my work as though that's what I say.
And all the sort
it's
of
an easy way to cover stuff up.
The muddying the waters in sort of twofold. But in the space beam, they're detracting from anything that's happening in the atmosphere by saying space, and beam, they're not understanding what the.
What's the diameter of the beam? Is it a zone of several miles wide? Like field effects.
Yeah, and the misrepresenting the directed energy
or instructed energy.
Yeah, exactly.
You can also call it.
Yeah. It's because they're saying directed, they think that that's a beam. It's being directed in a beam rather than it's being instructed to do something different.
Right, but then it moves from there to it must be laser beams because those are the only beams we know of. Well, that's what she must have meant. I'm just spelling it out for her because she's so poor at describing it. And it becomes again about the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also they're putting their failings onto your ability to describe, because you describe everything excellently.
Thank you.
It's people's understanding of terminology and critical thinking that leads them into a side path. They're getting tangent. But
there's another class of folks who we could name several of them in this, who say, well, she has nice, pretty pictures, but she has no idea what they mean. Here, let me explain. And I have the answer, because little Judy, she doesn't really understand her pretty pictures. There's that mentality.
Got all of it, yeah.
They say, well, she shows what happened, but I'm going to show you how it happened. Well, it's in the book. I just don't spoon feed it to them. It's there for people to own themselves. It's sort of my teaching method. It isn't like argument of the bottom line. Or people say, I don't agree with her opinion or her conclusions. Well, which conclusion? My conclusion is just a list of facts that are established.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. I see that so often. I mean, those memes, they have really stuck with a lot of people that consume that kind of stuff. And these are tactics that are aimed at people that won't read, that just won't read a book. And unfortunately, that's most people. Most people just won't read. And for these kind of people, unfortunately now, all it takes is a hashtag. So what we have here is a bunch of folks trying to have a conversation about facts and evidence and forensics, and some kid comes along with a can of spray paint and spray paints hashtag space beams right there in our conversation, and then runs away laughing at us.
Not realizing it's a reflection on them, but to whom?
Yeah.
And in a dumbed down society, cover-ups become easier and easier.
Mm. And that was the hardest thing for me as well, was to look at and actually get what was going on there, because you and I have spoken several times, and I've been picking at you and saying, well, this, and
what's the answer?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Give me the answer.
I can't do this question, miss. Can you tell me the answer? That's what I struggled with as much as anyone.
If you don't understand, if you don't own the information yourself, the answer is meaningless. It just becomes some buzzwords people argue about.
And that's why it's so important to have a physical copy, so you can go over things that you've read. And that what I found is that the more I accustom myself to the stuff that's in it, that pennies will drop. And it's like, and I've had the book for a fair few years, and still pennies are going, oh right, of course,
exactly.
That's what it's on about. Yeah.
So reading it multiple times is so important, because you gain an ability to take in more information each time through.
Mm.
Yeah, because you're building on a foundation of knowledge, aren't you? And you get to that level, and and then you get to that level, and you understand it a little bit more. Yeah,
I think it's because there's such a lot of detail in it that I mean, you as you say, you absorb a few more details each time round, and I think depending on your what you do for a living and what your experiences in life, some people are more detail oriented than others. Those working in, like Dr. Wood has in academia, and doing a lot of detailed work, it's something that's natural. But when, you're not working in that sort of environment, your ability to absorb detail is not quite as acute as other people. And as I've said,
but multiple reads through bring that up.
Right, exactly. So you might get somebody who reads it 2 or 3 times, to absorb the same level of detail as another person who only needs to read it once, depending on their ability to absorb detail.
I had to read it several times.
My father, it was 3 times.
I do too. I don't know what kids are doing in college these days. I'm guessing they just sit around and watch Vice documentaries. But back in my day, we used to buy very expensive books, and I had to read them 3 times to perform well on my test. That's just the way it went. That's how it goes when you're dealing with complex topics. And I think that the same applies with Where Did the Towers Go?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And it isn't about the answer. It's about understanding what's going on.
Yeah, understanding the process. And the process which you saw on that day, which a lot of other people didn't. And you took the time to actually investigate and really go into the whole process that was going on.
And I finally did, because I felt nobody else was. First I thought, okay, let the grown-ups take care of it, the ones whose job it is, and they obviously weren't. And then I realized this is our world. Whose responsibility is it to look into this? And it needed to get looked into, I felt. So I sacrificed myself to do it. And it still is true. No, it wouldn't have been done if I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And we talked about the cover-up and stuff, and Dr. Wood and I have discussed that many times, and we think that because of people like Fetzer and Gage and Jones and probably a few others, there's several others we could mention, this has delayed the publication of the book probably by at least two years, maybe even longer. So this book could have come out in 2008 or 2007 maybe, or even 2006 perhaps, if you'd followed, if you'd had a sort of clear run through with things, and you hadn't got all these, we hadn't still been learning about how the cover-up works, and that a lot of the people that had gathered around us weren't just being friendly, they were keeping tabs on us and watching what we were doing, and we were quite important to them, because certainly for myself, I just think of myself as just an ordinary person. But having said that, I realized that there were certain things that I was doing in 2005, 2006 time frame that were of interest to other people that wanted to keep this covered up, and they buddied up to me, particularly Fetzer and Jones, because they clearly, I was a threat to whoever was behind what they were doing, that I was going to help reveal some stuff. Not in a massive way then, because it was just on forums, but they could see that I wasn't just going to follow through the same old BS as everyone else was. I was maybe going to be, I was a couple of years behind where Dr. Judy was, at least, if not more. But I was sort of slowly getting there, and I wasn't going to.
And if you and I had met up before the others gotten a hold of you, that would have been a bigger problem for them.
It might well have been, potentially. I mean, we don't know how things would have panned out exactly, but potentially it would. And there is. I've described this as an undercurrent of awareness of Dr. Wood's book. Now it's not something that you can really sort of walk down the street and talk to somebody and, they would know. But you had that experience quite recently, didn't you, Dr. Wood, with your friend or your sister or something?
Oh, my sister-in-law. Yeah, she was having dinner with a friend, and the friend's brother was staying with her, and she said, because he was getting his leg worked on, and she said, well, how do you spend your time? Oh, I've been researching 9/11, and my sister-in-law bristled up and said, oh, well, my sister-in-law wrote a book about that, and then the guy said, oh, is her name Dr. Judy Wood? My sister-in-law's jaw hit the floor.
And was he reading the book?
Yeah, he'd gotten the book and read it several times.
Awesome.
He was on board.
Ah, brilliant.
Yeah, and it was just totally out of the blue. They met. And, he was saying he'd been studying 9/11, and she was trying to bristle up like, Well, I know even more.
Well, it's funny because today as well, a friend of mine was round, and I sort of mentioned little bits about your book to him or 9/11 or whatever before, but we'd never had a proper full conversation because it's one of my neighbours and he's just sort of in and out quite quickly usually. And anyway, today he sort of got more interested in it because he'd posted something, a meme about 9/11, and one of his friends had defriended him because she decided that she was suddenly going to embrace her Jewish roots, and she decided that it was anti-Semitic of him to be posting this thing about 9/11, whatever it was.
How?
So I don't know because
that was David Cameron's doing, I think, because Cameron said it about 2 or 3 years ago that he's worried about conspiracy theories and that 9/11 was a Jewish plot, and that was when he was at the UN. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was a little, kind of trigger that was implanted in that lady's mind because of Cameron, because that got wide coverage. Well,
Fetzer does that, and the Roth character does that too.
Well, of course, but they don't get nationwide coverage, on BBC and ITV.
That's true.
That's what I was meaning. But sorry, carry on with your story, Debbie.
So he was a little bit more interested in what I had to say about things today, and I just got talking to him and just completely explained all Dr. Wood's work to him, and the Hutchison effect, and all these kind of things, and Hurricane Erin, and how it relates to, everything we've been talking about this evening, with how it relates to the weather that is being pushed down our throats at the moment. And he went away quite happy to go and look into all the stuff. So, from the reaction he got to just a simple post that he'd put up on Facebook, which he might have just put up just for the sake of it, just not really thinking that much about it. But the reaction that he got from it by someone defriending him had kind of put the heckles up a little bit, and that was kind of the catalyst to look a little bit closer into what the whole thing was about.
Yeah, I was quite instrumental in that post.
That's right. Yes, yeah, I think you were as well. Yeah.
I was. People were trying to detract your work, and I was like, "Well, have you read the book? If you haven't read the book, then you don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
You're just one who follows conspiracy theories.
And I think there's another point at issue here, really, which is I've said this a few times, in that we're not talking about movements here. We're talking about quite often just one-on-one conversations or one-on-two or something, where a subject comes up, like the scenario you've just described, and then you have a one-to-one conversation, and then people go off and do, under their own, steam and their own volition, they go and do their own investigation. If you're trying to bang on them, you must look at this, you must do this research, it's very important.
Evangelical about it.
Yeah, exactly. If you're
cramming it down their throat.
Exactly. Yeah. It tends not to work. But I think if you can arouse people's curiosity in some way, or their curiosity has already been aroused by another topic, then they become more likely in a state, to be in a state of mind where they can, go and look at the things that we've been talking about and maybe try and digest them. And some people seem to be better at doing that than others, and some just kind of tend to run in the opposite direction, even though they might be curious. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But this idea of having movements and stuff, it doesn't.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. That what does it take to solve what happened on 9/11? It takes a forensic scientist, forensics engineer. That's all it takes. It doesn't take a club, a social club, and club membership. And with the more club membership and the bigger the club, the less likely that anything's going to happen.
Yeah. I've had that experience.
Except control and cover up.
with somebody, he was presenting some stuff on the UK column, and I had a chance to meet him. And it was a couple of weeks after that I met him, and I was sort of talking. Well, have you, looked into or read Dr. Judy Wood's book, and he was sort of saying, "Well, no," and then he was sort of.
And I'm not gonna.
He was sort of reverting into the cocoon of architects for 9/11 Truth bubble, and he was physically backing away from me as I was speaking to him because he was like he didn't want to engage in that conversation.
Well, they've been carefully trained to reject anything to do with evidence. It's just you got to keep reciting. I do remember that when Gage's group first set up, he thought it was a good thing to have a talking points list, and then that's what everyone needed to say, and you can't deviate from that.
Yeah. And this guy, he's a very tall man. He's probably about 6'5", and he was physically backing away from me, which I thought was
because he's convinced that you're Looney Tunes. Because that's what he was told. Yeah. It's very effective.
I've experienced that same thing before where it's like you can just see the shields go down and the eyes kind of glaze over and that cloak of AE 9/11 Truth go up. You know, their voice changes. It's a very strange reaction. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen it in person and online. You can even sense it in chat rooms or Skype conversations. It's really like
a cult. A cult is where you are discouraged from thinking for yourself.
Yes.
Well, we live in one big cult then.
I'm afraid it's worse than one big cult. I think we're surrounded by multifaceted cults left and right. Not to mention all of the criminal cartels around them too. So it's a mess out there.
That's why I think it's terrific. You're going to have Neil Sanders on to talk about that type of thing.
Yeah. Steve's been reading the book. He's well into it. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is how people are so easily controlled. Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
people complain that I'm not, the world's best speaker. I just talk about facts. I don't have the charisma, so I wouldn't be a good Jim Jones. They prefer a good Jim Jones, and that's what they've gotten. Well, Stephen Jones, but
or Alex Jones even.
Yeah.
That's something that gets me though when you're on about finding like facts and so-called truth. That people think that the truth is going to be given to them by somebody who is like a news, who looks like a what's
charisma.
Or from an authority figure,
like a news anchor.
Comes from an authority figure.
Yeah, or a babe. I used to say about teaching, if I look like a babe, nobody would pay attention to what I was teaching.
If you did and you came out with this work, they'd discredit it because they'd say you're just a bimbo.
Yep.
You couldn't win either way if you're coming out with the facts that you're coming out with.
Well, and that's all, logical fallacy 101, isn't it? Make detriments to the person rather than looking at the presentation.
But that's also another gift. What they're saying is they cannot refute what that person says. That's what they're actually stating.
Yeah, totally.
But it needs to be translated for most people, because most people, I noticed I was watching a dumb movie on YouTube, and this character that starts out at the beginning, I'm thinking, okay, this is the bad guy. He looks ugly, so he's got to be the bad guy. Yep. That's how they paint people to be, the evil character.
Yeah.
And the cute girl is always the good guy. It's a big pattern that they've trained people with.
Is that getting into the transgender movement there?
No, but that's another
that was a joke.
Weird thing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's strange that catering to one or two truly unique cases, but they instead use it to jumble up who people are. And the deal with the Bruce Jenner character, when that person was getting some award with ESPN, athlete of the year or something like that. And she got up there, or it got up there and said, "Oh, you have to excuse my dress because I'm new at this. I don't know what shoes go with what outfit. I had to really work hard to shop for this outfit." That was a dead giveaway at that point. If you're truly transgender, you don't have to work at it. You already know how to dress.
Yeah,
Didn't she get the Woman of the Year award?
Yeah.
Vanity Fair, yes.
And when the person was getting the Woman of the Year award, they're up on the stage and talking about, well, excuse me, because I'm new at this. I don't know how to dress, how to get what shoes to match what outfit. And I'm thinking that to me was that it wasn't any conspiracy or rumor mill. It was out of that person's mouth. And that, wouldn't be true if somebody really wanted that badly to be the opposite sex. They would have already had a closet full of clothes that they, would sneak into.
Yeah, and they would have been like,
oh, good, now I get to wear in public.
I chose my most fabulous dress for this wonderful evening, or something. But that sounded more like a guy who just didn't know how women like to dress. And
let's also
slipped up.
Let's also not forget that old Bruce there I believe he got 6-figure speaking dates, big contract for multiple 6-figure income single speaking dates.
I think he was hired for advertising this new gimmick that there's,
And he also was he actually a woman for a whole year that he was Woman of the Year for?
Oh, good question.
Who knows? But it's a strange distraction that that gets going on. What's that distraction for? What are they trying to divert us away from?
Yeah.
Well, maybe the androgenization of the human being, because if they're starting at a younger age to pump this ideology in, there's obviously people that feel that they are born into the wrong body. They might be a unicorn. He might be a unicorn.
There could be some real ones, and it could be due to some pollutants or something else in our environment, which should be looked into.
Or just some different rewiring of the brain. But to target younger and younger people,
and try to convince them that they should join that club,
and then them having the surgeries, whichever way. That's going to have a serious detriment on reproduction levels. I mean, as it is,
maybe that's one of the criteria or one of the goals.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Stop people or get people to change the sex so they can't.
Making them sterile. Yeah.
And also breaking down the family, because when you get rid of whether it's male or female, then you get rid of whether it's mama or dada. And so that means that you no longer have families. Yeah, you no longer have that social network. Mum, dad, kids, aunties, uncles. I mean, I wonder what's going to happen to the classics. How are you going to read Charles Dickens or something like that, where it says he and she and Uncle so-and-so and...
They'll go away. They're all gonna go away. That's what if the people in charge have what they want to have happen, they're all gonna go away. I mean, we were just discussing in one of our boiler room back chats the other night the state of bookstores in America. Some of our friends are traveling right now and stopping in bookstores, and what the amount of bookstores you find is getting smaller and smaller, and what's available in them is becoming more and more politically correct, for lack of a better term. So, you're not going to find them in your bookstores, as your bookstores are all disappearing. And just like 1984, they can easily get wiped from your tablet or your e-reader. So, I think that's what we're up against in a in a technocratic future, is exactly what Dr. Wood's talking about, is being able to own your information, being able to go to your information and look at it and say, okay, and interpret it for yourself. And that's the problem here, that is sort of an underlying thing that we're discussing tonight, I think, is that people don't want to own their information. They want to have it, fed to them on a twisted, rusty
and then
fork.
if it's wrong, they can blame somebody else. They don't have to be responsible for their lives.
Right. They think, oh, I thought that was a silver spoon feeding me this information, but it turns out it was a rusty fork, and I'll just move on to the next shiny spoon. Yeah, exactly.
The quote that I like, and as we near the end, what I want to make sure it's spelled out, as I like to say, is he who controls the energy controls the people, but he who controls their perception controls everything.
Yeah.
So for all of us who don't want to be controlled, maintain as best as you can your ability to not have your perception monkeyed with it or minimize it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great advice.
And everybody that was about then, because we've got a new generation of people that weren't even born when 9/11 happened. The people that witnessed that, whether it was in New York, as Miles was, or viewed it on the TV, everybody saw what happened, and the manipulation of what they were seeing is, like have you stated, in numerous shows that. It's the perception management of that event, because everybody. So 9/11 exposed what was happening. It's just that we were told something.
A different perception.
A different perception of what we saw. So everybody has seen that technology, wherever it is, and however it's utilised. That is the effect that it can have, and as you say, perhaps we should use that sort of power to help humanity rather than hinder it and lock it down, which it appears that that has had the desired effect of locking down humanity even more and more since that event.
Very much, very true.
So, any last thoughts? Anybody as we're wrapping up?
This is Hesher. I would just jump in real quickly and thank both Andrew and Dr. Wood for their work, their continued work. You guys were really instrumental in Spore and myself and a few other team members here at Alternate Current Radio doing what we do, getting on air and trying to discuss things as they happen in a common sense sort of way. So we really appreciate you. And I want to encourage people to check out your work if they haven't. And Andrew, you mentioned some of the other things that the work exposes, like climate change, global warming, and how that plays into everything. You mentioned free energy, fossil fuel. And one other thing I want to add to that, this also exposes the way that conspiracy researchers have been demonized and polarized and alienated from those on the outside, because I think that plays a really big factor into that cover up, right?
Can I insert something here?
Yeah, please.
You can't solve a crime with conspiracy theories. You can cover them up and distract people away from solving the crime by getting them to focus about conspiracy theories and getting them to feel justified in being and noble about being called a conspiracy theorist. But to really look at what's happening and not theorize and so much, but just actually be able to question things.
I think what was meant though really there was not so much conspiracy theories, but this idea of questioning official narratives. Now that process of questioning official narratives is called conspiracy theorism, if I can coin a phrase there, by many. So in other words, you question an official narrative of any kind and you are labeled a conspiracy theorist or perceived as one.
Right, even though it's nothing to do with conspiracies or theories.
Correct. So I think the problem then is that, you know, I had this issue on a radio show a couple of years ago, and I said I was an evidence analyst, or I was an alternative knowledge, researcher. I wasn't a conspiracy theorist. And this, you have to kind of pick people up when they start to use that label and say, hang on, why have you been, why have you referenced that label? But there's always the problem of when we're looking at these alternative scenarios and looking at the evidence of what happened, what do you call that? I'm a person that looks at what happened. You can't put that in a little neat phrase very easily, and it's always a problem conveying that to other people.
Right.
It's a big problem I have.
What I've seen is the term conspiracy theory is used by the organizations that corral people and then make them feel justified and just, oh yeah, thermite. It's okay to have a thermite theory. It's okay to have a mini nukes theory, and that becomes part of the cover-up.
It is. It's a whole industry in itself, and people want to talk about theories rather than knowing things. That's the other thing which comes out of what was said there. And but anyway, yes, I appreciate you saying that what we've done has been useful to you, and that's obviously, if it's helped you to sort of see things in a different way and in a more truthful way, in not just in what we've looked at in other areas, then obviously that's one of the main goals, certainly, that I have.
Oh yeah.
For the people.
Definitely. And, when I said conspiracy researchers, I'm referring exactly to what you're talking about there.
That's what I thought.
And the term was actually coined by the Central Intelligence Agency decades ago, with the intended purpose of using it in the way that you guys just described very well. So to me, just the fact that people that really get into following you guys and this topic, inevitably they end up falling into a rabbit hole online of interviews where you have to talk about, the efforts to cover up your work and the actual story, with this alternative narrative that's laid out there for everyone, which is, completely labeled conspiracy theorist at this point. So it really forces people to kind of take a deeper look at what that means, where does this term even come from, and how it is used to discredit people as a blanket term instead of, when looking at facts.
Well, yeah, if you're not talking about conspiracies and not talking about theories, then it doesn't apply.
Exactly. And it's so
you can't take a case to court based on theories or conspiracy.
But the thing is, though, it doesn't apply. But if it's seen to apply, if it's perceived to be an appropriate term, then people will just use it anyway, even though it's not appropriate, because it's perceived to be appropriate because of how it's all been dealt with since, for example, the Kennedy assassination. Just to pick a point in history,
I guess what I was aiming at is the true conspiracy theorists are trained to rebel against being called that. I mean, to feel proud of being called that, to say it's okay to be a conspiracy theorist, and therefore justifies in making up theories and about conspiracies, and that, I guess, helps suck things away from the facts.
There are two things, though. There are conspiracy theories, and then there are conspiracy facts. And you can be a conspiracy theorist, but you can move on from that when you've got all the facts together, and then it becomes fact.
I actually prefer the term theoretical conspiracist.
But if you're presenting facts, that's something that's. That becomes a whole thing in itself.
I think it is used to shut down conversation, to discuss, shut down discussion, because once that term's been put on the table, then everything becomes bunkum, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That'll be the end of the discussion, oftentimes.
Yeah.
And maybe a good place to stop this one. See what I did there?
I do. Yeah, I like it. Well, it's been great having you all on this evening. Well, it's this evening here. It must be the afternoon. And for any listeners, whatever time of day you're listening, thanks for tuning in. And we hope that you've enjoyed this round table chat. It was a very large round table that we've had in the lounge this evening.
We had to get a new one in.
Yeah, we did. We had to get another chair.
Well, we had to add you had to pull the table out and put that.
Yeah, thanks for wheeling in the extra chair, gang.
Yeah. It's like Christmas when all the folks come round.
So it's always bring your own microphone, though, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's been great. So I'd like to give a big thanks to Hesher and point everyone in the direction of ACR Radio and the Boiler Room, and say a big thanks to Hesher for all the work he does for 21st Century Wire as well, as well as and the UK column, and all the hard work he does on Boiler Room. Fantastic. Shout out to Spore, who couldn't make it this evening, but love all the stuff that you're doing, guys. Big thanks to Dr. Wood for coming on. As we've said, her book is just the gift that keeps on giving. You will not regret buying this book and really getting stuck into it, because it will just keep it will, that you get these things on your phones or your tablet or whatever, these brain game things that are supposed to kind of, as you're getting old and senile, keep your brain working. Forget that. Don't even bother. That's just there to program your brain. Get Dr. Wood's book. That will really get your brain going. It's absolutely fabulous book, and it will not only get your brain going, it'll get your brain working again in the right direction. Big thanks to Andrew. Thank you for coming on again. Always appreciate your input, Andrew, and hopefully we'll speak to you again very soon. Thanks to Miles for joining us again this evening. I'm sorry, Miles, we didn't get a chance to talk about the film that you wanted to talk about, but hopefully next week. What was the film?
American Made.
Ah, there we go. So we'll be talking.
It sounds good.
We'll be talking about that next week. That'll be something to look forward to. Thanks, Nick, for all the technical stuff. You've been a wizard. And thanks to Steve, who's taken a bit of a back seat today, which I don't think he's minded. He's been enjoying his cocktails. And we'll see you.
And also, thanks to Swami as well.
And thanks, of course. Always thanks to Swami. I know he's been in the chat room there. And lots of love to Swami and Norma, and we hope all your family are safe, because we know that we're not sure if it's friends or it may be family that have been making their way to you, because where they live, they could be in distress with the storms that are heading that way. So big love to everyone. Thank you for listening. Thanks, everyone.
Shout out to the chat room too. We had a good crowd in there.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and I'll put all relevant links on the show page to Alternate Current Radio, to wheredidthetowsgo.com, and checktheevidence.com. And if anybody wants to send me any other links, then I'll stick them on there too.
Yep, and we'll have a link to the new
video.
The Hurricane Erin video, the Irrefutable. Thank you, Hurricane Erin, which is.
It just came out about 5 minutes before the show started.
Oh.
Great,
so
that's exclusive there.
Excellent.
Fantastic. So we'll let the Proclaimers have the last word with Beautiful Truth.
See you later, folks.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. You know the hours that I passed without you, every heartbeat that I chose to flout you, and how I felt no shame. I know this problem is of my own making. I know you're giving here and I'm not taking, but please don't leave this place. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Don't let me complicate what you made simple by looking fancy or sounding boastful. Please bring me down. And now that I've said what's on my mind, and it is obvious that I am blind, please say you'll stay. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth. Don't leave because I can't see you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful truth.